Hello and welcome, or should I say, hola y bienvenidos, to all our guests joining us today. Please excuse my Spanish pronunciation just in case it did not sound right. We welcome you with warm hearts to another episode of the Flight-Based webinar series. I am your host, Vaishali, and in today's webinar, we will learn about Latin America's first autonomous drone delivery service, spearheaded by a guest today and his wonderful team. Starting as a true Colombian venture, honoring the country's national flower and its resemblance with drones, Orkid was born with a simple goal: to build a solution intended to solve one of the most critical issues that plague Latin American geography, that is, its undulated topography and poor road density and network. Our guest speaker today, Andres Uribe, the co-founder and CTO of Orkid, joined the young team with an ultimate ambition: to build a platform for autonomous cargo drones. With an MS in computer science from Columbia University, Andres has over 9 years of experience in designing user-face scalable systems for tech companies including Google. More recently, he was a staff software engineer at Lyft, where he led a team responsible for improving marketplace efficiency. Please join me in welcoming Andres to help us better understand Orkid's solution and how it aims to revolutionize the future of last mile delivery. But before I pass it over to Andres, I would also like to take a moment to introduce my colleague Achal. Achal heads the business development team at FlytBase. Today, he will provide you with a brief overview of FlytZip, the world's first software platform to empower drone delivery service companies with an essential tool to help them get started with deliveries in a matter of days. He would also share some insights around the need for FlytZip and what it brings to the table for our partners across the globe. Over to you, Achal. Welcome once again.
Thanks, Vaishali. Hi everyone, this is Achal. Nice to see you all today. So let's get into it. So I'll set the context so you can understand what is FlytZip. So FlytZip, as Vaishali correctly mentioned, is world's first aerial delivery platform. So it's a software platform to enable drone deliveries. Let's talk about that. So why do we need FlytZip, right? Why is there a need for a software platform? So when we started talking to a lot of drone delivery businesses, we realized that they face multiple challenges. So first of all, there are companies who have been providing or doing drone deliveries, but when you see them very closely, you'll realize that they have gone to a particular country or a particular region where they are conducting these deliveries. So drone delivery businesses have to be local, where they have to think about solving a global platform, but they have to act locally, where they understand what are the challenges of that topography or that region, and they have to design a solution according to that geography. Of course, they have an upfront infrastructure investment. They have to figure about the hardware, software, operations, regulations, compliance, as well as they would have to look for the systems that can scale. So you see, there are multiple challenges which drone delivery businesses face, and we thought that we could help them with a scalable system to get to that stage where they can use the required hardware and software to deploy their delivery operations. So as we see in the next slide, a lot of companies are taking a monolith approach where they would have to design their own hardware, payload mechanism, think about fleet management software, user management software, their drone station, mailboxes, local regulatory approvals, compliances, as well as think about how their delivery operations are going to be conducted. So that is so much to do for a company and to catch up with the big competitors or companies who have huge investments. But there are very much local companies, and then as we talk about, since this is going to be a very deployment which is specific to each and every region, there are companies who are looking to solve that problem for local people right there. And that is where we propose this modular approach using FlytZip, where we can help them with the software as they deploy and build their own hardware solutions. So benefits of module approach are multifold. First of all, it can help you shorter time to market, so quickly move from POCs to pilot to production. It helps you lower the investment cost, so you can use ready modules as well as have no or low R&D cost as you develop the systems, which otherwise would have been huge. You can choose the optimal solution and the best solution which is available in the market in each category. So you can select the best option for each layer for your unique offering. You could have your fleet of drones which could deliver different kind of payloads. You could have systems which could be the multicopters, VTOL, fixed wing, depending upon where you are delivering this. And of course the regulations, where you're easier to localize and adhere to the local regulations. So what does FlytZip offer? So first of all, it's a ready to use, configurable and modular system where you can manage, plan and dispatch your deliveries, and of course track them for every users. So we provide dedicated dashboards for operators, storefront, dispatchers, recipients. So the complete network of what it is required in a typical logistic framework is available to you. And FlytZip enables these users to monitor and conduct delivery operations in real time over cloud. The advantage here is, of course, you can use the right drone for the right application, where it supports all the major drones, off-the-shelf drones, as well as we can help you integrate custom drones depending upon a requirement. So as I said, you can deploy a multi-rotor, a fixed wing VTOL, UAV based on PX4, autopilot, DJI autopilots, etc., depending upon what you need. So to talk about how this advantage has been taken care by Orkid, now I would like to invite Andres to talk about how they have used FlytZip and what problems they have been solving, particularly in the region. So I would like to invite Andres here.
Hi, Shal. Thanks for the introduction. Let me introduce myself one more time. I'm Andres Uribe. I'm the CTO and co-founder of Orkid. Next slide, please. So I wanted to tell you a little bit of a story of the motivation behind where Orkid comes from and why we decided to start it. So it all starts with, like Basala said, we're based in Colombia, which is part of Latin America, and we view ourselves as a solution to a problem that exists in Colombia, but it's also pervasive in all Latin America. So first, let me tell you a little bit about a region in Colombia that's called Choco. It's a beautiful region, as you can see in the picture, and it's home for almost a little bit over 500,000 people. But as it is beautiful, it also, lots of nature, but also very difficult terrain to do any sort of developments. So what you can see there is, like this region, there's many regions like that in Colombia. Next slide, please. And Colombia is actually home to over 12 million people that live in such rural areas that are very difficult to access and very difficult to get to. And this is not only to get there in person, but also to get any sort of cargo there in a quick and efficient manner. So if you fast forward what this means in Latin America is actually home to over 200 million people that live in such rural areas. It's not only a problem that exists in Colombia, it's also very big in Brazil. And you've always heard like Latin America has a lot of big dense cities that usually have a lot of infrastructure, but besides the big cities, there's a lot of very small cities that are not as well developed. Next slide, please. So some of the key challenges that this brings over are three of them. The first one is a complicated topography. So as you can see in this picture, it's a very mountainous region. So the all of Latin America and South America has this beautiful mountain range called Los Andes, and it spans from the southernmost tip in Argentina, and it goes all the way to the northernmost tip in Colombia. And it basically goes through all the countries. And if it's not this complicated topography with a lot of mountains that makes it difficult to construct anything, then it's also a lot of tropical jungle where it's even harder to get to and do any sort of the typical road networks that you would usually see in other places. Then what this leads to is a lack of road infrastructure. So you can see lots of dirt roads that are typical. Even the main highways, when you compare them to developed countries, main highways are really in developed countries like 3 or 4 lane highways, whereas here it's very typical that you see either 2-lane or 1-lane highways. It could be the norm of what's connecting even 2 big cities. And so when you go into rural areas, you can even get into places that are secondary or tertiary roads that certainly aren't well built. This actually like Texas, if you measure this with a metric that's called road density, we're really lacking behind, and the only comparable continent in the world would be Africa, but we're really near the road density where they're at. And then on top of that, even in the cities that you have lots of traffic. So even when you do have the infrastructure, seemingly short distances are going to take you a very long time to get to. So you're talking about maybe a 3-kilometer distance that nominally on a car you should be able to do in a little bit less than 5 minutes. But then once you get out into the traffic, it could take anywhere from 30 minutes plus. So this key challenges bring problems like what we see in these pictures. And these pictures were actually tweeted by the Minister of Health from Colombia of what we're actually doing to deliver vaccines to remote locations. Like, this is what needs to happen. You actually have to have people carrying them through places that don't even have a road that's built for any sort of transportation system. It's just people carrying them and then figuring out how to get through. And then by road vehicles, we have a little comparison. So if you go back to the first picture that I showed, that's Choco. Capital of that department is called Quibdó. And the next closest city that's near that one is called Medellin. It's the second most populous city in Colombia after the capital. And the distance is around 150 kilometers, give or take. 250 kilometers, give or take. And if you want to go from Medellin to Quibdó, it would take you, with a road vehicle, around 6 hours. And then, in addition to that, because road vehicles are usually not electric right now, they might be in the future, but the truth is they're not right now, you're going to be creating a lot of CO2 emissions. There's the risk of lots of landslides. As I showed you before, there's a lot of mountains where the roads are built on. And then when you're building on mountains, there's a big risk that there's landslides because it's also a rainy country. So mud might just fall over the road, or it's pretty typical that you get trees that are over the road. So even though there's a road, you might not get through. And then on top of that, there's many costs and many factors that contribute to high costs, including fuel, gas, and tolls. Next slide, please. Now, there's another way to cover this distance. You can also do it with manned aircraft. Typically, this means a helicopter. And you can do that in a much shorter amount of time for 2 reasons. First, the distance is shortened because the roads usually don't go in a straight line, but it's mostly curved roads. And you can cover them by air faster because it's a helicopter. So we're talking about, if you do it by air, you can do it in a very short amount of time. We estimate around 40 minutes because you still have to take off and then make sure that everything is working correctly. But then CO2 emissions, aircrafts are still very big on consuming fossil fuels. You also need some sort of infrastructure, whether it's an airport or whether it's a helipad and a helicopter. And then when you talk about costs, if you're not sending a big payload, then it's going to be incredibly costly to hire a helicopter to deliver a small payload. So now, what I just introduced are many of the problems that happen in Latin America. And I want to present to you what we can do about it and how we've been thinking about creative solutions to this that don't require us to just build roads, because that takes an enormous amount of capital and a very long time to fulfill. So one of the key advances that has been happening in the last decade is the condensation of energy density and the cost per kilowatt hour. So what I have here in this chart is you can see how from 2008 to 2021, the costs per kilowatt hour have been dropping significantly in orders of magnitude, almost like 100x from where we were at for the production and manufacturing of batteries. And then on top of that, we have been able to condense more energy in the same volume. So if you look at over on the orange chart, then you're going to see that there's this trend up and to the right of almost doubling the amount of energy that we can pack in the same amount of volume. What does this mean? Next slide, please. That we can now create other types of vehicles that can use these batteries to power themselves to fulfill any sort of missions. So what you're seeing right now is, of course, an explosion not only in electric vehicles, but any sort of electric vehicle. In addition to that, in the last decade and a half, there has been a huge expansion and a very big development in 3D printing technologies, which let you iterate very quickly and build things that before would take a very long amount of time, or that you would have to pay a lot of money to do custom development for. With all this explosion, of course, all the ancillary things that are related to it have also improved, including electric motors. And then lastly, if you fast forward from 2008, where the first iPhone was introduced, now we have a very robust telecommunication infrastructure network that's global, that's connecting everyone. And that includes an LTE system all the way down to from 2G up to 5G in some places. And then you also have satellite communications, which let anybody in any place in the world be connected 24/7. Next slide, please. So what we created with this, I want to show you a little bit of what our journey was and what the end result was. Thank you, Bazali. So now I want to introduce you to the development that we did in-house. This is called Orkid 1. And we designed an aircraft that would be able to fly autonomously between 90 and 120 kilometers with a payload of up to 5 kilograms. What does that mean? That we can take things that could be medical or life-saving supplies from one city to a rural area in times that were thought of record before, or you had an enormous cost to do them. So next slide, please. So let me tell you a little bit more about Orkid 1. Next slide. So as I mentioned, with the battery density that we have right now, we're able to support those ranges by using fully electrical sources of energy. All the flights are going to be powered by batteries in this drone. Next slide, please. Then let's talk about command and control. Like I mentioned with telecommunications, we have infrastructure for telecommunications, and the way that the world has developed is that there are many companies that provide these services. So we've partnered with a company that provides technology where we can have redundant communication systems, so using multiple different telemetry links at the same time, so that we can ensure reliability across our telecommunication links at all times. This means that if one operator goes down, we're still going to have 2 or even 3 as a backup. And then if all operators go down, we're going to be able to have a satellite link backup as well. Now, in terms of motors, we've designed a system that's a VTOL mechanism that can transition into fixed wing, and that's actually how we achieve those ranges that we're talking about. We can take off anywhere. We don't need infrastructure. We can just simply take off vertically. The drone will transition and go into fixed wing flight, which is going to save most of the energy, as it's going to be letting the wings do all the work. And then when it reaches its destination, it's going to transition again into quad mode, and then it's going to be able to land. And then lastly, we designed it in a way that was smart and specific to be a drone that's going to be carrying cargo. So if you see other drones, traditionally, none of them have been created with deliveries in mind. And the usages that we've seen have been for inspections, security, and mapping. So what we did here was think about the volume and the weight that we were doing, and then incorporate that into the design of the aircraft in a way that the aerodynamics of the aircraft aren't going to be compromised, and also that the center of gravity is not going to be compromised either. Now let's go back to the same comparison that we were doing before, and let's imagine how fast we could do it with the drone that we designed. So by autonomous drones, we can do that distance in around the same time that a helicopter takes for 120 kilometer distance. We're not going to be creating any emissions because our fuel sources are entirely electrical. You don't need any special infrastructure to land it. You only need an area that's going to be around 5 by 5 meters or less to be able to land the drone. And then the costs are going to rival the cost of doing it with conventional transportation methods right now. Now, as Ashal mentioned, when you're building a delivery company, it's not only about the hardware that's required. There's a numerous amount of challenges that you have to face. And two of the biggest ones that we've been facing are regulatory and safety and assurance. The way we want to develop this is we want to make sure that we are on the same page as the authorities, because they are dictating where we're going. So we're working with the authorities. We're not taking an approach of just doing whatever we want and then operating. And so we're in the process of getting the first drone license for Class C exploitation within Colombia. And this is something that we're going to see as a milestone that will help us expand into other countries where they have very similar regulation, as it's all dictated by international organisms and all of the civil aviation authorities talk between each other. Then the next point is safety and insurance, where we've again partnered with one of the biggest local insurance providers to make sure that in the event that anything may happen that's unexpected, of course we're doing everything as reasonably possible to prevent any sort of accident. But if it happens, then we've partnered with them to make sure that any damages that might fall out from an accident are fully covered to the extent that the law permits, and sometimes even more. Next slide, please. So I want to describe a little bit what our solution looks like. So there's 3 pillars that we've done to develop our solution. The first one is in-house drone design. And as I mentioned before, we've designed a drone with cargo in mind from the beginning. The design that we've done targets 90% of the weight and distance of typical deliveries that we've seen in the market. And that distance would cover most of the routes that we expect clients will need to fulfill on. Then the next pillar is an enterprise-ready integration. And this is where FlytBase has been incredibly, has provided an incredible level of support, because we've been able to work with them closely to get the solution ready. And then the third aspect is service and operations. So we want to go to a company, we're a B2B business, and we want to go to a company and say, we're going to provide you with a drone fleet, and then we're going to do the service and operations. So you don't have to worry about learning about drones, learning about regulations, learning about how you have to do the service and operations of them. We're going to do it for you. And instead, we're just going to charge you a fee for operating them. So I want to show you a little bit what drone deliveries look like in 5 steps. So the first thing that happens, and this is assuming like behind the scenes, we get an order from a client that they want to deliver a package from point A to point B. That's all they have to tell us. Then the first thing that we do is just log in. Then after that, with the order that the client placed, now we know exactly what the pickup and the destination is. So we proceed as operators of drones to plan a mission and plan a specific route that the drone is going to be taking by setting waypoints along the route. So we ensure that it's not going to collide or it's not restricted airspace that it's flying through. Next slide, please. Then after that, everything looks okay. Then we get confirmation that we can proceed. We send a notification to the client, and finally the client has the ability to track the delivery at all times with the cameras that we built inside the drone. Now let me talk a little bit about the use case that we see us starting in, which we believe are going to have the highest impact in the coming years. First one is blood and lab work. So blood delivery is something that has been done already in some other places in the world, most notably in Africa. And we want to bring it and we want to provide that service within Colombia and then expand to Latin America. Lab work is also a service that you usually don't think about that much, but whenever you have any sample taken from your body, it usually has to go to a lab to be analyzed. And the faster you can get it, the faster you're going to get results. This is very important in life critical situations where doctors have to make decisions based on diagnostics. And what you usually have in a big city where there's a lot of labs that are able to process the samples, again, you don't have that affordance in more rural areas. So we want to be able to connect that. Then the second one, previous slide again. The second use case is vaccines, especially right now with the pandemic hitting, and then all the governments trying to get shots into as many arms as possible. It becomes critical to be able to deliver those vaccines to places where it's very difficult to get to. And then lastly, medical supplies and devices. So once you think about the healthcare life cycle, after diagnostics, at some point you need also supplies and devices for either emergency delivery or for operations that need to happen on the spot where you can't transport the person who's going to be operated on. So those are the three different areas where we see us attacking at the beginning. Next slide, please. Now in the future, what we want to do really is to expand this to multiple different use cases as well, not only focused in healthcare. So right now, we're at an inflection point where in Latin America specifically, retail is dominating most of the sales that are happening. But e-commerce is slowly and surely taking a bigger and bigger slice of that pie. So some projections that we expect are going to happen in the coming years is that by 2025, 32% of the deliveries that are going to happen through e-commerce. And then that small sliver that you see in dark orange at the top represents how many of those deliveries are going to happen with drones. And in a decade from now, we actually expect most of e-commerce to be, more than half of the sales that are happening in the world to be through e-commerce. And then all those sales need to be delivered to the people who are buying them. It's projected that within 10 years, about 80% of those sales are gonna end up being delivered with some type of drone. Now I want to tell you about Orkid's vision in the long-term future. Next slide, please. So what we want to do is not only stay within the distances that we've designed our system to, we want to expand it to multiple different types of drones. Those are going to include both first mile and last mile. So instead of having big truckloads that again require massive infrastructure in the form of roads, we see ourselves using bigger aircrafts that are going to be able to carry up to half a ton and then also be able to fly up to 600 kilometers in range. And then additionally, we see ourselves on the other side of the spectrum where you're not consolidating cargo and you're doing last mile delivery, mostly about e-commerce or any other sort of delivery that you can place. So this is very shorter distances, but with a range of around 200 kilometers. So we want to cover the whole gamut. So we have different services to offer to our clients. And with that, I just want to end it up with where we see ourselves just starting from Colombia right now, but then in the near future, expanding to all of Latin America, so that anywhere where you are, you can just open up your favorite app and then say that you want to have it delivered by drone within 30 minutes.
Thank you, Andres. We sure would like to see that happening and happening soon. Before we would then now like to move and open the session for a Q&A. And if anybody from the audience has any question for Andres, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A channel and we'll take them. So we have a couple of questions already. You compared the one question for Andres is that you compared the time and cost of helicopter and UAV, but what about payload? How much more weight can helicopter carry than UAV? How many flights does a UAV perform to reach the same amount of cargo?
So great question. And this, of course, like a helicopter can carry much more weight. I don't know the exact numbers, but I think a helicopter can carry up, depending on the type of helicopter, you can carry probably like up to half a ton. So you're talking about almost 100 different flights if you're using this type of drone. But again, at the beginning, like the idea is to replace some of the rush deliveries where you can't do cargo consolidation. So if you're talking about a blood that's needed, a package of blood that only weighs 2 pounds or between 2 and 3 pounds. And if you want to pay for a helicopter and you don't fill it up with all the things that you need to carry, then your costs are going to go through the roof. It's a very similar thing that happens with cargo trucks. Cargo trucks can carry up to, I think the number is 22 tons. But then you need to do consolidation. Consolidation always means waiting, and waiting means that your delivery is not going to arrive right now, but maybe in a couple of days.
All right. We also have a question around what kind of deployment models do you plan to provide? Like how can users get started with the Orkid's delivery service?
So what we're offering right now is a service that includes 2 different components. The first component is an implementation fee where we come into your company and then we try to understand as much as possible what routes you're fulfilling right now, which ones are critical, which ones are time critical. And with that knowledge, we do some data analysis that we've done already to understand where we're going to be adding the most value. So it doesn't make sense for us to, again, if you don't have a delivery that needs to be fulfilled very quickly, then you're not going to be fulfilling that delivery via drone because it doesn't make sense in terms of cost. Then that implementation fee also includes understanding what your facilities look like, and then what sort of adaptations you're going to end up needing to do in order to deliver, in order to have a drone fleet in it. And then lastly, also includes all regulatory permit authorizations that are going to be needed to operate the routes that we recognize. Then after that, our model is to charge a per hour fee per drone. And then the price really depends on the type of company that we're working with and the type of cargo that we're delivering.
All right. On the same lines, Andres, there's a lot of question around cost. So if you could maybe share some insights, what is an estimate of how much would this cost to operate monthly? A most basic scenario, for example, one drone. I also have a similar question. For example, what would be an average cost to transfer, for example, 5 kgs of goods to around 100 kilometers?
Okay, so let me answer the first one. So roughly, what's an estimate? And I'm going to do like very big buckets of where the costs come from for the operation. The first bucket is the operators themselves. So that is our estimations, and this of course is going to be improving with technology as it becomes better and better, is that we're going to be able to have an operator for every 10 drones at some point. That's going to let us, of course that requires a high level of autonomy, but once you achieve it, then that bucket is going to be divided by 10. And those operators, we're not talking about big R&D budgets for that kind of operator. Then the second bucket is maintenance. So of course you have to pay capital expenses for the drone itself, and then maintenance for parts of the drone that are going to be used and you're simply going to have to replace them. So we're talking about like motors are going to last a certain number of hours, servos are going to last a certain number of hours. Maybe you're going to have to change pieces in the fuselage. You're going to have to change batteries, of course, after they live through their life cycles. And then as far as costs, exact numbers, I am not comfortable sharing them publicly, but we're pretty confident that when you compare the costs of what it takes to operate one of our drones, it ends up being less than the cost that you would have to pay for the alternative to be able to deliver the same quality of service in terms of time for a delivery of that distance. So typically, like, that means we're going to be able to deliver your package in 120 kilometers radius within 1 hour.
All right. And also there is question around the hardware itself, Orkid One. Can it fly at any time of the day? For example, does it need to support some weather, like good weather condition? Would it work in a rainy environment?
So it's subject to typical like aircraft constraints. We still haven't yet tested the full amount of winds that it can withstand. And of course, when it rains, some of the communication systems are not going to be safe to operate. So it cannot operate in rain or shine. And then during the night, it really depends on regulation. That's the biggest thing right now. Operating during the night is very different than operating during the day. It's still evolving and we're tracking it closely. But ideally at some point, we're going to be able to operate at night. This is our estimate, is that it's going to take between 2 and 3 years for that sort of regulation to come through.
All right. Speaking of regulations, we have a question around, would you help the clients who would want to avail your service with the complete regulatory approval, like getting through the complete process of regulatory approvals done?
We do it for them. We basically do that work for them, and that's what we include in our implementation fee. We're going to understand what are the routes that you need to operate, and right now the approvals that are being granted are really per route. So once you fly those routes, then you're going to be able to fly them over and over again.
All right. And speaking of the implementation fee, we also have a question around, if anybody would want to start business in a different country, would you help them set up a trained team with facilities? Is that something that you would also provide? Meaning
the same business, or you mean supporting a business that's outside in a different country?
Supporting a business, like helping them with the training of how to operate the system, or is it something that you would go ahead and deploy yourselves?
Well, initially what we want to do is do it ourselves in Colombia and then quickly expand to Brazil and then Mexico, and then eventually to all Latin America. But of course, like if there's a compelling reasons for us to, or there's a path to do this in a way that's faster and convenient for us, of course we want to listen to that idea. So if that's something that someone in the audience is interested in doing, please reach out to us. We're always open and curious to hear some potential partnerships. Great.
We also have a lot of questions on the hardware. One question is, how do you secure the package between the time the drone drops it off and the time the recipient of the package arrives to collect it? Is there any provision for that?
Right. So something I did not talk about was that the boxes were custom designed as well for 2 reasons. So if you see the boxes, our boxes are not typical rectangular boxes, but they really have like these 2 edges, trailing edges at the bottom. Those were designed intentionally because we're going to have 2 sort of pincers that are going to be pincering the box during flight to make sure that it stays in place. And then once the drone lands at the location where it has to deliver it, then it's just going to open those 2 pincers. The box is going to drop down. It's just going to be gravity doing the work, and then the drone is going to take off again.
All right. we saw undulated topography and hard to reach areas, so there could be a necessary that it might not support a lot of good internet connection. So does the software and the complete system need to be connected to cloud at all times, or is it possible to go through an offline mode as well?
Well, that's more a regulation question. For BV laws, what we've been hearing is that you really need to be connected at all times, or you have to have the ability of knowing where the drone is, and we're doing that via a satellite link. So what we're thinking for the longer term, when you really have ultra low connectivity areas, like first off, like if you don't have satellite connectivity, like then it's going to be, we're not currently supporting it. We're not thinking about it in our roadmap right now. But once you get to really low connectivity areas, we're going to fall back to satellite connectivity, which is going to give you the location of the drone, and then you're going to be able to send command and control commands to it.
All right. From the software side, Achal, do we have any fail safes in place just in case it loses connectivity, or is there something that corrective action that can be taken?
Right. So most of the fail safes, the basic fail safes have been already provided in FlytZip. And as we are working with our partners, like with Andres and team, we are realizing what are the other things that would be required for typical geographies or topographies to do that. So basic fail safes, of course, includes your connectivity. What happens if you lose your 4G connectivity, your battery fail safe, nobody is connected to the drone, what happens in this case? And all of this is user configurable. So you can allow the drone to either continue the mission, wait and hover in a quad mode, or come back and land to the home locations. So these are some basic settings that we already provide, and we are continuously integrating it with different workflows that are required for drone delivery businesses.
All right. And via the software, is it possible for the receiver of the package, are they constantly receiving updates, or how does it happen?
Right. So that is core of it, because consider any kind of delivery that you get today, right? The visibility is really important, because the whole first value prop is the time in which it is getting delivered. And in most of the cases, these are also emergency situations when you are doing delivery of blood packets or medicines, etc. So all the stakeholders have live view of the drone. They also have live video feed coming from the drone, as well as the telemetry. So they can track it in the real time, sitting anywhere.
Speaking of stakeholders, Achal, there are multiple stakeholders involved when it comes to delivery. So do we have separate levels of user access for the stakeholders, or do everybody have access to the same platform?
Right. So different users have their own different accounts. So you could have an admin operator who could add all the drones which are available in fleet, and you can manage that. You can also have a ground operator who can have a account with just one drone, so they can manage that drone where they are sitting at that local hub. Then you can create various dispatchers or shippers who can have multiple accounts to generate delivery requests. This is same as how you today operate maybe your any logistic accounts that you could be using, right? So you suppose you want to send a delivery package, you'll just go to your logistic vendor. It could be FedEx, UPS. You'll just create a delivery request, and FedEx and UPS would do it for you to send it through their aircrafts from one country to another. And meanwhile, your customer tracks the delivery. On the same lines, using FlytZip, you have multiple dashboards for different stakeholders, where ground operators, remote operators, stakeholders like storefronts, dispatchers, as well as receivers can track the delivery.
All right. Moving on to Andres, we have questions around, would you be open to partnerships in countries outside of South America?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, like we're always open to partnerships. Again, if that's something that you want to do, please reach out to us, and then we can figure out the best way to work together.
Also, a question, a concern that comes is where would we need to pick up the items from the customer? Where would they place it in the first place? Is it going to be, how are the deployments going to be from the customer's end, if in case you need to pick up items from the customer, or is it always one direction?
Well, it depends again, and this comes as a consequence of what we do during the implementation phase, where we understand what the needs of the client are. So we're a business to business. Typically, what our clients or the clients that we've been working with, they have some sort of hub where they use as a central point for distribution. So how we see things working is we're going to be sending the drone from the hub, which we're going to do some adaptations for, to some remote location. Now that remote location sometimes may or may not have the package to bring back. Or that remote location will be at a distance where we're going to have to do a battery swap when we arrive there. But beyond that, it really depends on the use case.
All right. And again, since you spoke about hub, we have a question on, is the system planned to be hub-based, or is it conceived to be able to deliver virtually anywhere?
Sorry, what was the first part of the question?
Is the system planned to be hub-based, or is it conceived to be able to be delivered virtually anywhere?
It's conceived to be delivered virtually anywhere, but it's eventually virtually anywhere. What we found through our work is that it's going to be really, we have a very long road ahead to get to that place in terms of regulation. And of course, when you land via VTOL, you can't simply land anywhere in the world. You need at least some sort of flat surface.
Yes. Another question on this is does the drone support 5G connection as well, or has that something that you've already tested?
We haven't tested it. The hardware itself doesn't support it, but the way in which we built it makes it modular enough that it's very easy to swap that. It's just about swapping the command and control link, where you can just add either another source with an antenna that's set up for 5G networks, or you can just simply replace the modem itself with another modem. Typically those modems are very light, so they don't really add to the weight that the aircraft is carrying.
All right. Speaking of batteries, is there any battery management strategy that you have in place? For example, what is the ratio of time a drone can be flying to the time it is required to be charging on ground? Does it limit the drone from flying for particular hours in a day?
Yeah, that's a great question. And our strategy really revolves around having a higher inventory for batteries so that we can do battery swaps while some of them are charging. So if you think about it, the way we've designed the system, it's very easy to take apart some pieces and then plug them back in. Batteries is one of those. So you just simply take another pack of batteries, put them in when they're charged, and then replace the ones that were drained and put them back in the wall so that they start charging.
All right.
If you're asking about the ratio, we're not sure yet. We really, a lot of the numbers that we have are a work in progress, so we're making them better as we go.
Also, does the cargo system right now support multiple package deliveries? For example, the same system can drop a package and then move forward to another destination, or is it a single delivery unit right now?
It is meant to do takeoff and landing twice. So it can go to a destination and land, and then take off again, and then come back and land.
All right. I think we have a lot of other questions, some of them again revolving back to the regulation. So do you have certifications of UAV? How will you do the certifications of UAV and operators, for example, EASA or FAA, which is the aviation authority's requirement for delivery in different areas or different geographies?
Right. So again, like the regulation, we're working hand in hand with the regulators to understand what exactly are the requirements to have everything in the stack around our operations? What are the hardware requirements? Because we're not sure yet if they're going to come back and say you need certain sort of redundancies that we currently haven't implemented yet. We don't, there's really not regulation right now. I mean, beyond the FAA and like maybe Canada and I believe Ireland have much better regulation around this. And then of course, like some of the places where this is already happening in Africa. But we're starting in Colombia, and then we're working with the authorities to understand exactly what it is that we need to do in order to be able to operate.
Great. I think one final question for Achal. We are running out of time. So what kind of added security does the software offer that is already not implemented by PIXOC?
So security, I'm not sure, does that just talk about safety of the system or the connectivity or the data security? But let me answer both. So when I started talking to a lot of people who are conducting deliveries and using, say, a PIXOC based drone, they might be using something like a mission planner or a key on control to do that delivery. Now, of course, for basic trials, etc., that could be okay, but that's not how you're going to scale the complete system. Because as Andres said, most of the BLS waivers or regulatory authorities are going to give you that waiver based on multiple components and safety checks. So you need live connectivity where you can connect remotely to the drone and get all the data sitting at a remote location. You need a reliable robust system which can be scaled to multiple drones. FlytZip provides you end-to-end encryption in terms of your data, drone telemetry, control, video, etc., as well as it can help you scale the system. So on the security side of data, that is something which FlytZip ensures. And in terms of safety, not only the basic fail-safes which are there in the PIXOC, but as you move forward, you need more and more integration. So one of the things that are coming up is integration with UTM. So you might have your own airports or your corridors on which you're only able to fly. You might have a lot of no-fly zones, etc. So how can you make sure that these operations are safe? So that is where these third-party integrations would come into the play, as well as there could be some recommendations from government or regulatory authorities for that integration. So all of that is not possible with standard PIXOC, where you need something where you can integrate these additional logic and have the application specific logic residing on the edge piece as well as on the cloud, so you can operate and scale your operations.
Thank you so much, Achal and Andres, for answering our guest queries. Today's session was indeed an eye-opener as to how drone deliveries can become a game changer in Latin America, especially when it comes to saving lives. The Orkid solution is definitely a giant step toward it by enabling deliveries of be it medical equipments faster than the traditional transportation methods. We are not only solving the problem of accessibility, but also catering to other pressing issues such as the major costs involved in both delivery as well as storage of equipments and tons of fuel and resources that are required for the last mile delivery. Thank you once again. Achal and Andres, would you like to share any closing thoughts?
Sure, I'll just go first. So I'd like to thank Andres for taking out time to share their insight and what they're building. We really value our partnership with Orkid, and we really see that huge potential and the problem that they are solving, which is specific to that geography. So thank you so much, Andres, for working with us and coming on this webinar and sharing insight. We look forward to continue working together and make these delivery possible in the coming months.
Thank you so much, Chal. Thank you, Bazali. Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure to share our solution with you. It's been a pleasure to work with you in order to make this a reality. And I look forward to what the next years are going to have in place for us. And also, I want to thank the audience. Great questions. Again, feel free to reach out. Our website is orkid.tech. We're very easy to find online.
Sure, we'll leave that links in the chat box. So feel free to visit orkid.tech. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to Andres and team, and they'd be happy to answer them. If you have any questions related to software, feel free to go to FlytZip.com, and I will be happy to take your questions regarding the software.
Thanks once again, Andres. I would also like to thank your entire team for being the torchbearer for the Latin American population and geography. Until the next webinar, signing off. Have a great day ahead, everyone.
Great. Thank you.